Welcome, listener, in the shadows. We bring stories into the light. Join me as we explore the encounters no one speaks of and the things that watch from the dark. You were never supposed to see this, but since you have, you might as well wear it. From the vaults of the shadows, a new collection of unsettling apparel and artifacts pulled straight from the stories that were never meant to surface. Soft, worn-in shirts and hoodies that feel like something you dug out of a locked trunk in an abandoned ranger station. This isn't just merch, it's evidence. The Shadow on Old Mill Road, Chapter 1. The Vanishing, Day 1. The last walk, Frank had never considered himself a man prone to superstition or fear. The rhythmic clang of wrenches and the smell of engine oil grounded him, a steady heartbeat in the quiet rhythms of his rural town. His small life was simple but sufficient, punctuated by evenings spent walking Jasper, his dog, a brindle-coated mutt with wide, searching eyes that seemed to hold 1,000 unspoken thoughts. That October evening began like any other. The sky hung heavy, a steel-grey canopy pressed low over the treetops. The sun was a pale orb struggling behind thick, roiling clouds, as if reluctant to set. The air was crisp, carrying a chill that hinted at the frost to come. The scent of damp earth, fallen leaves, and distant wood smoke mingled in the breeze. Frank clipped the leash to Jasper's collar as the dog sat obediently by the porch steps, tail thumping softly against the cracked wood. The two started down Old Mill Road, a narrow ribbon of cracked asphalt that curved past abandoned barns and gnarled trees whose roots grasped desperately at the soil. The woods flanking the road were old, older than the town, and thick with shadows even in daylight. Townsfolk rarely ventured far past the edge. Jasper, ever curious, sniffed eagerly at the underbrush where dry leaves rustled faintly in the wind. Frank kept a steady pace, boots crunching on the gravel. The chill settled deeper in his bones, and the occasional call of a distant crow punctuated the silence. As they neared the rusted remnants of the old mill, Frank felt a sudden stillness press down, a silence unlike the quiet of dusk, the usual rustling of squirrels, the flutter of wings, even the whisper of wind seemed to freeze. It was the kind of silence that made the hairs on his neck stand up, that thickened the air until it felt almost solid. Jasper's ears perked, his body tensing. Then, without warning, the dog lunged forward, pulling hard against the leash. Frank stumbled, nearly dropping the collar, as Jasper barked sharply toward the dense thicket at the forest's edge. "Easy, boy, come back," Frank called, but Jasper's gaze was fixed, unblinking into the shadows. Then came the sound. A low, guttural growl, so deep it vibrated through the air and into Frank's chest. It was a sound no animal Frank knew could make, thick, primal, raw. The kind of sound that seemed to crawl under your skin. Frank's grip slipped. The leash slipped through his fingers. Jasper bolted into the trees. Frank shouted, heart hammering, his breath sharp and ragged in the cold air. The dog's barks echoed once, then vanished. The woods swallowed the sound. Frank stood frozen, the cold creeping up his spine. His eyes darted to the empty space where Jasper had disappeared, to the darkening woods that seemed suddenly alive with whispered threats. A weight settled in his chest. The kind of weight you can't shake, no matter how loud you scream inside. He called again, louder this time, voice cracking, but only silence answered. The sky dimmed further, clouds rolling like storm waves. Frank's breath caught in his throat as the last light faded. Jasper was gone. Day 2. The marks in the dark. The night settled like a dense, suffocating blanket over Old Mill Road. Frank barely slept. The absence of Jasper gnawed at him, an unrelenting ache twisting his gut. Every creak of the old house, every whisper of wind through cracked window panes sounded like the echo of those vanished barks. He woke to the cold, early morning light, filtering weakly through the thin curtains. The house smelled stale, old wood and dust, with a faint undercurrent of something acrid he couldn't place. His skin prickled with unease. Outside, the world was muted under a thick layer of mist that clung to the trees like ghostly veils. The early frost made the ground hard and brittle beneath his boots as he stepped out, determination setting his jaw tight. Frank's first stop was his truck, parked by the garage. It was his lifeline. the sturdy frame and familiar mechanical hum a tether to normalcy. But as he rounded the corner, a chill that wasn't from the morning air curled cold fingers down his spine. There, etched deep into the truck's driver's side door, were huge, ragged claw marks. The paint was shredded in jagged strips, exposing raw metal beneath. The grooves were too wide, too deep to be from any known animal. Frank knelt beside the marks, tracing the terrible pattern with a trembling finger. It felt fresh, the scent of iron sharp in the air. His pulse thundered in his ears as his gaze drifted to the ground. Near the truck's tires were enormous paw prints pressed into the damp earth, oversized and unnatural. Each print was perfectly formed, an imprint of massive pads and curved claws, unlike anything he'd seen outside of horror stories or bad jokes. His mind wrestled between denial and dread. The town was quiet, too quiet. Later, he stopped by Maggie's diner. The familiar chime of the bell above the door offered a fragile comfort. Inside, the murmur of low conversations and clinking cups masked the tension. He slid onto a stool at the counter, fingers tapping nervously. Maggie, the owner, gave him a look heavy with concern but didn't press. A few locals eyed him, whispers swirling beneath polite nods. "I lost Jasper," Frank said quietly, voice cracking. A group of older men exchanged glances, lips tightening. "You're best off staying clear of the woods," one warned, voice low. "That land listens too well. It's different now." Frank pressed for answers. They shook their heads, wary. Some things out there don't want to be found, and some things, they come back, but they ain't the same. On his drive home, Frank's mind churned. The woods felt alive with something ancient and watching, something patient. Back at his house, fatigue pulled at him, but sleep was elusive. Shadows in the corners of his vision flickered like smoke. Every creak in the walls was a whisper, every wind gust a warning. He checked his journal. The last entry, written in his neat hand, was dated yesterday. But beneath it, a faint second scrawl appeared, messy and jagged. Words half-formed, phrases like "I hear it," and its calling scratched across the page in letters that weren't his. Frank stared, breath shallow. Was he losing his mind? Or was the forest already seeping into his thoughts? Day 3. Whispers beneath the pines. The dawn was a fragile thing, barely brushing the horizon as Frank dragged himself from restless sleep. His body ached with exhaustion, but his mind churned with unease. Every moment without Jasper felt like a slow unraveling, as if the very fabric of his reality was beginning to fray. He didn't want to go outside, but he knew he had to. The woods called to him in a way he couldn't explain, a silent pull tugging beneath his ribs like a heartbeat out of sync. Stepping into the morning chill, Frank noticed the air had changed, thickened with an almost tangible presence. The mist hung lower, swirling around the trunks of ancient pines that lined Old Mill Road like silent sentinels. Their bark was rough and cracked, but today it seemed almost alive, pulsing faintly under his gaze, as if breathing with a secret life. His boots sank slightly into the cold earth as he walked the perimeter of his property. The paw prints from the day before were still there, unnervingly clear and undisturbed, looping endlessly in a cruel, perfect circle. He followed them with a tightening throat, the space between each step feeling like a countdown to something he didn't want to see. Closer to the edge of the woods, he found claw marks, deeper now, gouged into the bark of a massive oak tree. The gouges were jagged and raw, and around them the air vibrated with a low, almost imperceptible hum, like the earth itself was humming a dark lullaby. Frank reached out, fingertips trembling to touch the tree's bark. It was warm, unnaturally so, and as his skin made contact, a flash of memory pierced his mind. A childhood afternoon, sun filtering through leaves, Jasper bounding through tall grass. But the memory was fragmented, like shards of glass, reflecting something darker lurking beneath. He shook his head, trying to dispel the visions, but the whisper began. Faint at first, the rustling of leaves, the sigh of wind through branches, but then, unmistakably, a voice. It was his voice. A soft, fragmented whisper coming from everywhere and nowhere at once. "Run, don't trust the night. It listens." Frank staggered back, heart pounding like a drum in a storm. His breath came in ragged gasps as the woods seemed to close around him, shadows stretching and shifting like living things. He fumbled for his radio, desperate for connection, but the static was thick and unyielding. Amidst the crackling interference, the voice returned, clearer this time, speaking words he hadn't said, phrases born from the depths of his own mind. "You're not safe. They watch. They wait." He pressed the button, calling out, but only static answered. The radio felt heavy in his hand, a lifeline slipping through his fingers. Retreating back to the house, Frank's mind spiraled. He checked his journals again, pages filled now with scrawls in a handwriting that twisted and warped, almost as if multiple hands had inscribed the same chilling messages. "It's inside. The shadow is inside." That night, sleep was a distant memory. His dreams bled into waking hours, flashes of fur and teeth, distorted reflections. A howl carried on the wind that was both his and something else's. And somewhere beyond the tree line, the forest whispered, listening, waiting. Day 4. The weight of silence. The morning came slow, reluctant to reveal itself. A heavy grey sky hung low, pressing against the rooftops like a shroud. Frank woke with a start, his skin slick with cold sweat. The nightmare that had gripped him all night was still vivid. An endless chase through dense woods, his feet sinking in mud, Jasper's terrified eyes reflecting something ancient and unknowable. He sat on the edge of his bed, staring out at the creeping fog that clung to Old Mill Road. The silence outside was different now, not just the absence of sound, but a dense, suffocating quiet that felt almost alive. Even the birds were mute, their usual morning songs swallowed whole. Frank dressed slowly, the weight of exhaustion dragging on him like chains. He stepped outside, boots crunching on frost-hardened grass, and noticed the chill had deepened overnight, settling in his bones like a slow poison. His gaze flicked to the forest's edge. The pines stood dark and immovable, their tops lost in the swirling mist. Something about the shadows there made his skin prickle, like the forest itself was holding its breath. He reached for his radio, hoping to hear the reassuring crackle of a human voice, but all that came back was static, thick and unyielding. Then, faint through the interference, the whisper came again. This time it wasn't just a voice, it was layered, a chorus of voices all speaking at once, and everyone sounded like him. "Come closer. You belong here. You're already part of us." Frank staggered, gripping the radio tighter. The words echoed inside his head, merging with memories that didn't feel like his own. Flickers of his childhood home, long-buried fears, and moments of primal terror swirled in a confusing dance. His eyes fell to the ground, where the paw prints circled endlessly. The prints were sharper now, pressed deep into the dirt, as if the creature had grown heavier or more determined. Frank followed the path, each step heavier than the last, until he found himself standing before the massive oak tree, its bark scored with fresh claw marks that oozed a dark, sap-like substance. As he traced the jagged gouges, the air thickened, and a cold wind swept through the branches. The whispers grew louder, more urgent, their cadence shifting from invitation to command. Suddenly, the earth beneath him trembled, a subtle vibration that resonated through his boots and up his legs. The forest pulsed with life, ancient and terrifying, drawing him deeper into its grasp. Back at his truck, Frank found new marks, scratches along the metal body, long and deep, as if claws had raked the surface just moments before. The scent of damp earth and something metallic hung heavy in the air. He realized with a sinking heart that the forest wasn't just watching, it was waiting. By nightfall, Frank was unraveling. His journal, once neat and methodical, was now a chaotic tangle of words and symbols he couldn't decipher. The last entry chilled him to his core. "The shadow grows inside me. I'm losing the man I was. Tomorrow, I will follow the trail beyond the trees." As darkness swallowed Old Mill Road, Frank felt the eyes of the woods upon him, patient and hungry, as the whispers bled into the wind, promising that soon he would answer their call. Chapter 2, The Parallels, Day 5. The first echoes. The forest seemed to breathe around Frank as dawn bled weakly through the grey sky. The mist curled between the trees like ghostly fingers, obscuring everything beyond a few paces. Each step he took along the narrow path was muffled by a thick carpet of decaying leaves and moss. the smell of damp earth rising like a cold breath into his nostrils. The footprints, the same massive paw prints from his backyard, appeared again, this time leading deeper into the woods. Frank's eyes darted nervously from shadow to shadow, but the forest remained eerily still. No birds called, no twigs snapped underfoot, just an oppressive silence that pressed on his chest like a weight. His radio crackled sporadically, a distorted voice cutting through the static. It was him, his own voice, but twisted, stretched, as if recorded through a cracked lens. "You're not who you think you are," he froze. The words sunk deep, slithering beneath his skin. His hand trembled as he switched off the device, trying to drown out the voice that seemed to crawl inside his mind. Later, as the sun fought to pierce the canopy, Frank stopped near a gnarled tree. The bark was scarred with new claw marks, but beneath them was something more unsettling, a series of strange symbols etched with precision. They pulsed faintly, like a heartbeat, glowing just enough to be noticed. A cold shiver ran down his spine. He reached out to touch the carvings, and a sudden flood of fragmented memories crashed over him. A child running through a forest whispered warnings from a distant voice, a howl that wasn't quite human. His breath hitched, the line between past and present blurred, and he staggered backward, heart pounding. That night, Frank's audio logs recorded something impossible. Overlapping with his own voice were whispers, soft, urgent, alien. They repeated fragmented sentences from his childhood, things he'd long buried in the dark corners of his mind. "You'll rot cleanly. We'll grow through you." The words echoed, filling the small cabin with an unbearable tension. Frank played the recording over and over, desperate to understand what was happening to him, but the more he listened, the more the voices seemed to twist and multiply. His reflection in the cracked mirror grew stranger too. The eyes staring back were still his, but something ancient glimmered within their depths, something wild and hungry. As he lay awake that night, the forest whispered through the thin walls, promising to reveal secrets older than memory, and Frank realized with mounting dread that the creature wasn't just stalking the woods, it was becoming a part of him. Day 6, the mirror's breath. The morning light crept hesitantly through the grimy windows of Frank's cabin, casting long, fractured shadows across the worn floorboards. Outside, the woods were draped in a thick fog that seemed to swallow sound whole, a suffocating silence that gnawed at Frank's nerves like a restless animal. He sat at the rickety kitchen table, hands wrapped around a mug of cold coffee. His eyes were bloodshot, his skin pale and drawn. The footprints had led him back to the edge of the forest the day before, but his mind felt as tangled as the undergrowth outside. Every time he looked in the cracked bathroom mirror, something shifted, just barely, almost imperceptibly, but enough to make his heart race. His eyes, once a dull brown, now flickered faintly yellow when caught in the right light. His jawline seemed sharper, his face stretched in ways he couldn't explain. It was as if the reflection was a veil, thin and trembling, barely holding back something darker beneath. The locals avoided him more than ever. At the diner, the usual casual greetings were replaced with sideways glances and quiet murmurs. Even old Joe, who had never cared much for rumors, warned Frank with a grave expression. "This landhade's got its claws in you now. Better turn back." But Frank couldn't. He had to find his dog, had to understand what was happening to him. That afternoon, the forest pulled him in again. He found himself walking along the same twisting trail, the familiar paw prints leading him deeper where the canopy thickened and daylight dimmed to twilight. The air smelled richer here, more alive. But beneath it, something rotten lingered, like decay buried beneath fresh soil. He stopped abruptly at the base of an ancient oak tree, where the bark was torn in long, jagged gouges. Nestled between the claw marks was a small scrap of fabric, torn and muddied. Frank recognized it instantly. It was from his dog's collar. His chest tightened, breath catching in his throat. A low rustle echoed behind him. Frank spun around, heart hammering, but saw only shadows. The forest held its breath. His radio, forgotten in his jacket pocket, crackled to life. This time the voice wasn't just distorted, it was insistent, layered with something primal. "You're not alone. We are inside you." Frank dropped the device in shock. The words burrowed into his mind, unrelenting. That night, his dreams pulled him under. He ran on all fours through an endless forest, howling at a pale, distant moon. His skin prickled with fur, his fingers clawed the earth. The line between dream and waking blurred until he jolted awake, gasping for air, sweat slick and cold. When he glanced at the mirror, the glowing eyes stared back. They belonged to something not quite human, something wild. Frank didn't know how much longer he could hold on to himself. Day 7. Echoes in the dark. The dawn brought no comfort. Frank's sleep was fractured, haunted by the relentless howl of wind threading through the skeletal trees outside his cabin. The chill seeped through the walls, clutching at his bones like unseen fingers. Even the familiar creaks and groans of the old wooden house felt alien, ominous. He rose reluctantly, moving to the cracked mirror again. The reflection had grown more distorted. Now, the faint yellow glow in his eyes pulsed like embers flickering in a dying fire. His skin felt tight, stretched over bones that ached as if they were shifting beneath the surface. The scent of damp earth and rotting leaves clung to him, even after a long, cold shower. Frank wrapped his coat tight around him and stepped outside. The town was quiet, a suffocating stillness pressing down harder than ever. The usual chatter of neighbors was replaced by wary silence and furtive glances. At the hardware store, the clerk barely looked up as Frank entered, handing over supplies without a word. The old man's eyes, however, told the story, a mix of pity, fear, and something else Frank couldn't place. Back at home, Frank spread out maps and notes across the cluttered kitchen table. The paw prints, the claw marks, the whispers in the static of his radio. It was as if the forest was rewriting him, page by page. His radio crackled again. This time, the voice was clearer but colder, mechanical almost, repeating fragments of his own voice in loops. "We grow inside. We are roots beneath your skin." He grabbed the recorder to play back the tapes from the previous days. The voice mimicked him perfectly, down to the inflections and pauses, but the words twisted into something alien, sinister. The temperature in the room dropped sharply. Frank's breath fogged in the stale air. Outside, the forest seemed to pulse, alive and watching. Compelled by a force he didn't understand, Frank found himself drawn back to the woods. The trail beneath his boots was different now, softer, as if the earth was breathing underfoot. The footprints that matched his boots traced a looping path he couldn't break free from, like a spiral tightening endlessly. He followed the loop deeper, the trees growing closer and darker. The whispers began again, fractured sentences from his childhood. Snippets of laughter, a mother's voice calling, a father's stern warning. Yet beneath them, something darker slithered, twisting those memories into threats. At the loop's center, Frank stumbled onto a clearing where the air hung thick and heavy. The ground was littered with bones, animal and human, half buried beneath decaying leaves. A twisted tree, gnarled and blackened, stood sentinel, its bark scarred with ancient claw marks. Frank's fingers trembled as he reached out to touch the bark. The tree seemed to pulse beneath his touch, as if alive. The forest was no longer just a place. It was a living entity consuming him, threading itself into his very marrow. He staggered back, the voice whispering behind his ear, "You belong here. We are one." That night, the boundary between man and monster thinned. Frank's dreams bled into waking hours, shadows shifted in corners, sounds warped and twisted. He was losing himself, piece by fragile piece. The howl that rose from his throat was no longer a sound of fear. It was a promise. Day 8, the becoming. Frank woke to a thick fog hanging low over the town, tendrils curling through the trees like silent fingers. The early morning was eerily still, the usual chorus of birds and insects conspicuously absent. It felt as though the world was holding its breath, waiting. His body ached in places he hadn't known could hurt. The muscles in his arms and legs throbbed with a dull, unfamiliar soreness, and a strange tightness gripped his chest. The reflection in the cracked mirror caught his eye again. His eyes, unmistakably glowing faint yellow now, held a wildness that unsettled even him. For a moment, he thought he saw the outline of sharp teeth lurking just behind his lips when he forced a smile. A shiver crawled down his spine. Frank forced himself outside, the heavy fog muffling his footsteps. The world beyond his porch felt distorted, colors muted, shapes blurred at the edges. The scent of wet earth was stronger here, tangling with something metallic and old, like rusted iron mixed with blood. He heard it before he saw it, the crunch of heavy paws on dry leaves, slow and deliberate. Turning sharply, heart-hammering, Frank caught a glimpse of something just beyond the mist. A hulking silhouette, impossibly large, with glowing eyes that reflected his own fear back at him. But then it vanished, dissolving into the swirling grey. Shaking, Frank took out his recorder, hoping to capture the sound. His fingers trembled as he pressed play on the last recording. "You'll rot cleanly. We'll grow through you." The words looped, warped by static, whispering promises of decay and rebirth. His breath hitched. The forest was no longer just outside his home, it was inside him, like a parasite, slowly unspooling the seams of his humanity. Frank's memories started slipping, like water through fingers. Blank patches replaced hours. He found himself waking in strange places, dirt under his nails, scratches on his arms, mud-caked boots, but no memory of how he'd gotten there. Each time, a deep, pulsing hunger welled in his gut, a craving he couldn't name. At the hardware store, people no longer avoided him outright. They crossed the street, their faces tight with fear. A few whispered about the Dogman, the myth that had haunted the town for generations. But Frank was no longer sure if it was myth or truth, or if the line had long since blurred. That evening, driven by a compulsion he barely understood, Frank followed a trail into the woods. The same looping footprints haunting his property, twisted and endless. The trees leaned closer, their gnarled branches clawing at the sky, and the air smelled like rot and rain. In the heart of the forest, he stumbled upon a small clearing where the earth was churned and torn, revealing a tangled nest of bones, both animal and human. Nearby, the remains of his dog lay curled protectively, eyes closed but chest rising and falling. The sight shattered something fragile inside him. Then, from the shadows, the creature emerged. It was him, and not him. Muscles rippled beneath matted fur, eyes glowing the same eerie yellow. The creature's mouth opened, revealing sharp fangs dripping with saliva, but in its eyes, Frank saw a flicker of his own sorrow and confusion. The transformation was no longer just physical. It was a fracture in his mind, a tearing between two selves, man and monster, hunter and hunted. The howl that echoed through the woods was both a warning and a lament, a sound that carried the weight of a soul unraveling. Frank understood then. He was becoming the shadow that haunted Old Mill Road. Day 9. The splintering mind. Frank's nights had become battlegrounds, his dreams no longer his own, but invaded by twisted visions of the forest and the creature he was becoming. Each morning he awoke drenched in sweat, heart pounding, with a primal urgency that never fully faded. This morning was worse. The fog clung to the town like a second skin, muffling sounds and turning familiar shapes into monstrous silhouettes. The scent of damp earth and decaying leaves pressed against his nostrils, unrelenting. The woods seemed alive, watching, waiting. His reflection in the cracked mirror no longer resembled the man who once tinkered under hoods and fixed rusted engines. His eyes glowed fiercely now, a yellow flame trapped beneath the surface. When he spoke, his voice sometimes cracked, rough and unfamiliar, as if something deep inside was struggling to break free. He tried to hold on to himself, to the memories of his wife's laughter, his dog's wagging tail, the hum of his old Chevy's engine, but they felt distant, like echoes from another life. His journal was no help. It was filling up with entries he did not remember writing, words twisting into something darker and fragmented. One passage read, "The woods are hungry. They whisper secrets in my bones. I hear them now, singing beneath the bark, calling me home." Every page was smeared with dirt and claw marks that he couldn't explain. The townsfolk avoided him more than ever. Whispers of "he's lost it" and "don't go near Frank" followed him down Main Street. The mechanic who once greeted everyone with a smile was now a ghost, an uneasy presence lurking in the shadows. Frank's senses sharpened unnaturally. He could hear the rustle of a mouse beneath the floorboards, the distant drip of water seeping through cracks in the old mill. Night brought new sounds, low growls rolling through the air like thunder, branches scraping against windows like fingers scratching for entry. One evening, While tending to his truck, Frank noticed something chilling. A set of massive paw prints pressed deep into the mud beside his porch, perfectly mirroring his own boot prints. The pattern looped back on itself in an impossible circle, as if the forest itself had swallowed time whole. Driven by equal parts terror and compulsion, Frank ventured into the woods again, guided by the whispering voices only he seemed to hear. The trees around him seemed to pulse with a strange life, branches twisting like gnarled hands reaching out to touch him, leaves rustling in voices that spoke fragments of his childhood memories. "Run! Come home. You're ours," his footsteps faltered. The forest was no longer a place, it was a trap, a vast maw waiting to consume him entirely. In the deepest part of the woods, Frank stumbled upon an abandoned ranger's cabin. Inside, dust-covered journals lay scattered, pages yellowed and brittle. They told the same tale of a presence that mimicked voices, stole minds, and swallowed souls whole. One entry stopped abruptly, mid-sentence. We heard it speak, our own words twisted into lies. It promised us safety, but the roots are hungry. And now, I'm not sure who I am anymore. Frank's radio crackled to life with a faint, distorted voice. "This is Frank. I'm in the roots now. If you hear me, turn around." The message repeated endlessly, a haunting loop that echoed inside his skull. The line between man and monster blurred until he could no longer tell where one ended and the other began. Chapter 3, The Fractured Day 10. The lingering howl. The morning air was thick with a cold dampness that seeped into Frank's bones. The fog had rolled in overnight, swallowing the landscape whole, turning the world into a blurred watercolor of grays and shadows. Even the usual hum of the town felt muted, as if the very atmosphere was holding its breath. Frank didn't trust himself to stay inside today. The cabin felt like a cage, walls closing in with every heartbeat. The shadows cast by the old wooden beams seemed to slither, creeping closer every time he blinked. His skin crawled with an itch he couldn't scratch, a restless energy clawing at the edges of his sanity. He pulled on his boots, heavy and worn, and stepped outside. The footprints, the endless loop of giant paw prints, were still there, pressed deep into the mud, mocking him. They beckoned, an unspoken command he couldn't ignore. As he walked toward the tree line, the forest greeted him like an old enemy. The air was thick with the scent of pine, wet earth, and decay. Every step stirred a chorus of subtle sounds. The snap of twigs, the whisper of leaves, the faintest scrape of claws against bark. Yet there was something else, something beneath the surface, an almost imperceptible hum that vibrated through the soles of his boots and into his marrow. The trees seemed to lean inward, their branches brushing against each other in a secret language. The bark rippled faintly, as if breathing. And then the voices came, soft at first, like wind through the leaves. Then louder, fragmented words pulled from the depths of Frank's mind. "Remember, run, you belong." But the words were jumbled, twisted, slipping in and out like half-remembered dreams. They spoke in his own voice. Childhood laughter, whispered apologies, his mother's warnings. The uncanny mimicry sent chills cascading down his spine. Frank dropped to his knees, trembling as a cold sweat broke across his forehead. The line between memory and hallucination blurred until he couldn't tell which was real. The radio on his belt crackled, and his recorded voice spilled out, distorted and warped. "You'll rot cleanly. We'll grow through you." The words echoed in the fog like a curse. His fingers brushed the mud, and the roots beneath it pulsed softly, like a heartbeat syncing with his own. The forest was alive, and it was hungry. Day 11. The endless loop. Frank awoke disoriented. His body ached with exhaustion, and the strange fatigue that weighed on his chest was suffocating. His boots were caked with fresh dirt. Scratches lined his arms, and the gnawing hunger that had been growing inside him was nearly unbearable. He stumbled back toward the truck, hoping for something, anything, that would ground him. But the footprints were there again. The same impossible loop, circling endlessly around the edge of his property, the forest just beyond. He followed them without thinking, pulled by a force stronger than reason. His heart thundered in his ears, adrenaline mixing with a deep-rooted dread. As he moved deeper into the woods, the trees grew taller, their thick canopies blotting out the weak sunlight. The air smelled richer here, almost metallic, with a sharp tang of moss and rot. The branches above swayed despite the still air, casting flickering shadows that danced like spirits. The whispers followed him, soft and insistent. "Come home, we see you. You are ours." Frank's breath hitched. The hairs on his neck stood on end as a shadow shifted at the edge of his vision. He turned, but nothing was there, only the endless, watching trees. His footsteps slowed, matching the rhythm of the loop beneath him. He knew with a sick certainty that he was walking in circles, trapped in a maze designed by the forest itself. His radio crackled again, barely audible. "I never left. I'm in the roots now." He dropped to the ground, trembling, as the forest whispered around him in a language older than memory. Day 12. Roots that remember. Frank woke to the faint rustling of leaves, a sound so soft it might have been a dream. The sun had barely risen, but the forest was already alive with an uneasy pulse. He felt hollow, like a vessel cracked and leaking memories he didn't own. His hands shook as he opened his journal. The last entry was a scrawl of words he didn't recall writing. "The trees remember, they watch. I am not alone, never alone." Outside, the wind stirred the branches, whispering fragments of sentences, as if the forest was trying to speak directly to his mind. He rose slowly, every joint aching, every nerve alight with tension. As he stepped outside, the world felt distorted, colors duller, shadows longer. The line between day and night seemed to bend. His gaze fell on the footprints again, but this time they led beyond the loop, breaking into a path that hadn't been there before, a faint trail into the heart of the woods. The air grew colder as he followed, the silence thickening, pressing down on him. Beneath the soil, something moved, roots shifting and curling like sentient fingers. A sudden flicker in the trees caught his eye. A figure, tall and gaunt, with eyes glowing faintly yellow, watching him with a predator's patience. But when he blinked, it vanished, gone, or perhaps never there. The forest's breath brushed against his neck as he realized the truth settling like frost in his chest. He was becoming part of it. The bark, the soil, the roots, they weren't just trees. They were an extension of something older, something that had claimed him. His radio crackled, distorted. "You'll rot cleanly. We'll grow through you." He swallowed hard, voice hoarse. "Who's there?" No answer, only the endless whisper of leaves. Day 13. The hollow mirror. Frank's reflection in the cracked mirror by the cabin's door was different. His eyes flickered gold when caught in the fading light, the edges of his face stretching subtly, like shadows melting on stone. His breath came in ragged bursts, as the forest seemed to seep into his skin, an infection without a cure. The locals' warnings echoed louder now, empty eyes and hushed voices. They crossed the street when he passed, speaking in whispers, eyes full of fear and suspicion. The claw marks on his truck had deepened, as if the creature marking its territory grew stronger every day. The scent of wet fur and decay hung in the air, following him like a shadow. He tried to write, to record everything, but the words twisted on the page, unreadable. His journal had become a cryptic code, a map of his unraveling mind. His dreams grew darker, filled with running on all fours, wild howls echoing through moonlit woods, and the cold eyes of a beast watching from the darkness. In the mirror, the man staring back was breaking apart, half human, half something else. His voice cracked as he whispered to himself. "Who am I becoming?" The radio hissed one last message before falling silent. "This is Carmen. I never left. I'm in the roots now. If you hear me, turn around." Frank's last glance was at the woods, now alive with a terrible hunger. To be continued. Comment down below what you think happens next. You made it back for now, but the things in the dark never truly leave, do they? They watch, they wait, and perhaps they remember you now too. If you want to hear more, if you dare to listen again, step back into the shadows. Like the video, subscribe, but know this, some doors once opened do not close so easily.